Members of Congress just introduced legislation that could fundamentally destroy your ability to buy ammunition conveniently and affordably. And this bill is being disguised as common sense public safety when it is actually nothing more than a direct attack on your Second Amendment rights through economic warfare and government surveillance. This new proposal is called the Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act, and the name itself is designed to mislead you because this has absolutely nothing to do with stopping criminals or reducing violence. What this bill actually does is create a nationwide system that makes buying ammunition more expensive, more difficult, more time-consuming, and subjects you to government tracking and reporting if you dare to purchase what they consider to be too much ammunition at one time. We are going to break down exactly what this legislation does, why it is blatantly unconstitutional under the Bruen standard, who it really targets, and what you need to do right now to fight back against this assault on your rights. Before we go any further, if you want to support what we do here and make sure you stay informed about threats like this that the mainstream media will never properly explain, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications so YouTube actually sends you these videos when we release them. Now let's get into what this bill actually says and why it is so dangerous for every single gun owner in America. The legislation we're talking about is House Resolution 7166, and it has been introduced by House Democrats who have actually tried to pass various versions of the same concept multiple times over the years. Each time it gets repackaged with slightly different language, but the core goal remains exactly the same, which is to make ammunition harder to obtain and to normalize the idea that the government should be monitoring and tracking ammunition purchases by law-abiding American citizens. The bill is branded with that deceptive name, the Stop Online Ammunition Sales Act, but when you strip away all the political marketing language and the anti-gun talking points, the actual intent becomes crystal clear. This legislation is designed to accomplish several specific things that work together to burden your Second Amendment rights. First, the bill would ban direct-to-consumer online ammunition sales by requiring face-to-face identification and verification through a federally licensed firearms dealer for any ammunition purchase made online. What this means in practice is that even if you order ammunition through a website, you cannot have it shipped directly to your home anymore. Instead, you would be forced to have it shipped to a licensed dealer. Then you would have to physically go to that dealer's location, present your identification, have them examine and verify your identity and eligibility, and only then could you take possession of ammunition that you already paid for online. This is virtually identical to the system that California already has in place, where ammunition purchases must go through an FFL, and buyers must pass 1 or 2 background checks depending on their status in the state database just to buy ammunition. That California law has been challenged in court and is currently working its way through the Ninth Circuit with oral arguments scheduled for March. But now, House Democrats are essentially trying to take California's failed and unconstitutional system and impose it on the entire nation. If you live in a free state right now where you can order ammunition online and have it delivered to your door just like any other legal product, this bill would end that freedom completely and force you into the same broken system that Californians are currently stuck with. Second, this legislation would expand federal licensing requirements on ammunition dealers and sellers, which means layering in new compliance costs, new regulatory requirements, new paperwork burdens, and new government oversight on businesses that sell ammunition. These increased costs and regulatory hurdles do not just affect the businesses themselves, they get passed directly to consumers in the form of higher prices and reduced selection. Small online ammunition retailers who operate on thin profit margins would be hit especially hard by these new requirements, and many of them would likely be forced out of business entirely, which would reduce competition in the market and drive prices even higher. The big box stores and major corporations can afford to hire compliance officers and navigate complex federal regulations, but the small independent retailers who often offer the best prices and the best customer service would be destroyed by this legislation. That market consolidation is not an accidental side effect. It is part of the strategy to make ammunition less accessible and more expensive for ordinary Americans. Third, and this is perhaps the most alarming part of the entire bill, it would impose mandatory reporting requirements for what they define as bulk ammunition purchases. Under this act, a bulk purchase is defined as anything more than 1,000 rounds purchased within a 5-business-day period. If you buy more than 1,000 rounds in that time frame, the dealer would be required to report that purchase to the United States Attorney General, to state law enforcement agencies, and to local law enforcement agencies. Let that sink in for a moment. The federal government wants ammunition dealers to report your name, your purchase details, and the quantity of ammunition you bought to multiple levels of law enforcement simply because you exercised your constitutional right to purchase ammunition in a quantity that bureaucrats in Washington have decided is suspicious. This is not about stopping criminals, because criminals do not buy ammunition online under their real names, and they certainly do not submit identification or comply with reporting requirements. This is about creating a registry of lawful gun owners who buy ammunition, tracking their purchasing habits, and treating ordinary Americans like potential threats simply because they choose to buy ammunition in bulk to save money or to stock up for training and practice. Now let's talk about why this legislation runs headfirst into massive constitutional problems that should result in it being struck down immediately if it ever becomes law. Courts have already recognized, even before the Supreme Court's landmark Bruen decision, that the Second Amendment does not just protect your right to own firearms, it also protects your access to ammunition. This makes perfect sense because a firearm without ammunition is just an expensive paperweight. And any restriction on ammunition access is a restriction on your ability to exercise your Second Amendment rights. The right to keep and bear arms is meaningless if the government can simply choke off your access to the ammunition needed to make those arms functional. After Bruen, the constitutional standard is even clearer and even stricter. Under Bruen, the government must demonstrate a historical tradition of firearm regulation that justifies any modern restriction they want to impose. The government has to show that the type of restriction they are proposing is consistent with how arms and arms access were regulated at the time of the founding, or at least during the period when the 14th Amendment was ratified. Here's the problem for supporters of this ammunition ban. There is absolutely no historical tradition of banning remote purchases of ammunition. There is no historical tradition of requiring face-to-face identification and verification for ammunition purchases. And there is no historical tradition of government reporting requirements or surveillance based on the quantity of ammunition someone chooses to buy. In fact, the historical evidence points in exactly the opposite direction. Firearms and ammunition were commonly sold through catalogs, through mail order, through advertisements in magazines and newspapers, and through other remote purchasing methods long before the internet ever existed. Americans in the 1800s and early 1900s could order guns and ammunition through the mail and have them delivered directly to their homes with no background checks, no identification requirements, no government reporting, and no restrictions based on quantity. That was the tradition, and that tradition continued well into the 20th century until modern gun control laws started chipping away at it. If the government cannot point to a historical analog for the restrictions in this bill, and they absolutely cannot, then under Bruen, this legislation is facially unconstitutional and should be struck down the moment it is challenged in court. Supporters of this bill will tell you that it is all about public safety, and that public safety must take priority over the convenience of online ammunition purchasing. That framing is deliberately misleading and dishonest. This bill does not target criminals in any way whatsoever. Criminals do not buy ammunition online using their real names and having it shipped to their real addresses where it can be traced back to them. Criminals do not submit government identification to FFLs. Criminals do not comply with reporting thresholds or any other aspect of this law. Criminals obtain ammunition through theft, through straw purchases, through black market sources, and through other illegal means that completely bypass any system of regulation you could possibly create. This bill does absolutely nothing to stop or even inconvenience criminals, but it does create massive burdens, costs, and government surveillance for millions of law-abiding American gun owners who are doing nothing wrong. The people this bill actually targets are competitive shooters who burn through thousands of rounds in training and competition, hunters who stock up on ammunition before hunting season, firearms enthusiasts who like to practice regularly at the range, budget-conscious buyers who purchase in bulk to get better prices, and rural Americans who live far from retail stores and rely on online purchasing for access to products they cannot get locally. Let's address the 1,000 round reporting threshold specifically, because this provision reveals just how out of touch and ignorant the authors of this bill are about firearms and ammunition. Anti-gun politicians and the mainstream media love to treat ammunition ownership as inherently suspicious. You constantly see news reports where they raid someone's home and breathlessly report that the person had an arsenal of weapons and stockpiles of ammunition, but then you look at the actual numbers. And it is just a few common firearms and maybe 500 or 1,000 rounds of ammunition. To anyone who actually shoots regularly, 1,000 rounds is not a stockpile, it is not an arsenal, it is not suspicious, and it is not even that much ammunition. If you attend a single serious training course that lasts 2 or 3 days, you can easily burn through 1,000 rounds or more. If you shoot once or twice a month for practice, you will go through well over 1,000 rounds per year. If you own firearms in multiple calibers, which most gun owners do, you need to maintain ammunition supplies for each of those calibers. If you shoot competitively in disciplines like 3-gun or USPSA, you might go through 1,000 rounds in a single month of practice and competition. Buying ammunition in bulk quantities of 1,000 rounds or more is not extreme, it is not unusual, and it is completely normal behavior for anyone who takes shooting seriously. There are also very practical economic reasons why people buy in bulk. Ammunition is a consumable product. You use it up every time you shoot, and you have to continuously replenish your supply. Buying in larger quantities almost always results in better per round pricing, and online retailers frequently offer bulk discounts that can save you significant money compared to buying smaller quantities. Local gun stores often have limited selection and higher prices because they cannot compete with the buying power and efficiency of large online retailers. So many gun owners rely on online bulk purchases to get the ammunition they need at prices they can afford. There's also the simple reality that ammunition availability can be unpredictable. And when you find ammunition in stock at a good price, you buy as much as you can afford because you do not know when you will find that deal again. Treating these completely ordinary and rational purchasing decisions as something that should trigger government reporting and law enforcement scrutiny is not about public safety. It is about surveillance and creating a chilling effect that discourages people from exercising their Second Amendment rights. The reporting requirement in this bill is designed to build a de facto registry of ammunition buyers that the government can monitor and track over time. Even though federal law prohibits a national gun registry, this ammunition reporting system would accomplish much of the same goal by identifying gun owners, tracking their purchasing patterns, and creating databases that could be used for future enforcement actions or confiscation efforts. The government would know who is buying ammunition, how much they are buying, what calibers they are buying, and how often they are buying. That information could be cross-referenced with other databases, analyzed for patterns, and used to build profiles of gun owners that the government considers potentially problematic. This is surveillance state infrastructure being built under the guise of public safety, and it should be rejected completely. Now let's talk about the economic impact of this legislation, because the financial burden it would create is itself a constitutional problem. If this bill becomes law, every online ammunition purchase would require transfer through an FFL, and FFLs charge fees for their services. Those transfer fees typically range from $20 to $50 depending on the dealer and the location, and that cost gets added to every single ammunition purchase you make online. If you currently buy ammunition online 3 or 4 times per year, you would suddenly be paying an extra $100 to $200 annually just in transfer fees, and that is on top of whatever the ammunition itself costs. For people who shoot frequently and buy ammunition regularly, those transfer fees could add up to hundreds of dollars per year in pure deadweight cost that provides zero value to the consumer. That economic burden makes ammunition less accessible and makes regular shooting practice less affordable, which directly infringes on your ability to exercise your Second Amendment rights. The Supreme Court has recognized, in other contexts, that the government cannot impose fees and costs that make constitutional rights prohibitively expensive for ordinary people, and that principle applies just as much to the Second Amendment as it does to any other right. The increased costs do not stop with transfer fees either. As I mentioned earlier, the new licensing and compliance requirements imposed on ammunition dealers would increase their operating costs, and those increased costs would be passed on to consumers through higher prices. Small online retailers who currently offer competitive pricing would either raise their prices to cover compliance costs or go out of business entirely, which would reduce competition and give remaining sellers more pricing power. The ultimate result would be that ammunition becomes more expensive across the board, which makes gun ownership more expensive, which makes the Second Amendment effectively less accessible to people with limited incomes. This is part of a broader strategy we see from gun control advocates where they cannot ban guns outright. So instead, they try to make gun ownership so expensive and burdensome that many people simply give up and stop exercising their rights. That strategy is unconstitutional, and it should be called out for exactly what it is, which is an attempt to turn the Second Amendment into a privilege for wealthy people rather than a right for all Americans. Let's also consider the legal vulnerabilities of this legislation beyond just the Bruen historical test. This bill likely violates the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures because it creates a system of warrantless surveillance where the government collects information about your ammunition purchases without any probable cause or individualized suspicion of criminal activity. You are not being investigated for a crime, you have not done anything illegal, but the government demands that your purchasing information be reported to multiple law enforcement agencies simply because you bought a quantity of ammunition that politicians have arbitrarily decided is too much. That is a general warrant of exactly the type the Fourth Amendment was designed to prevent. The bill also raises serious Commerce Clause and Tenth Amendment questions about federal overreach. The regulation of interstate commerce and the licensing of businesses within state borders are traditionally state functions, not federal ones. And this bill represents a massive expansion of federal control into areas that should be left to state governments. There are also equal protection concerns because this bill singles out gun owners and ammunition purchasers for special surveillance and restrictions that are not applied to people exercising other constitutional rights or purchasing other types of products. Now here's the good news in all of this. The political reality right now makes it extremely unlikely that this bill will actually become law in the near term. Republicans currently control the House of Representatives, which means this bill would have to get through a Republican-controlled committee process and a Republican-controlled floor vote. And that is simply not going to happen with the current composition of Congress. Even if Democrats somehow managed to pass it through the House, it would then have to pass the Senate. And there's no realistic scenario where this bill gets 60 votes in the Senate to overcome a filibuster. And even in the extremely unlikely event that this bill somehow passed, both chambers of Congress, President Trump would almost certainly veto it, because signing a bill that bans online ammunition sales and creates a federal ammunition registry would trigger an absolutely massive backlash from his base and from Second Amendment advocates across the country. Trump has made mistakes on gun rights in the past, most notably with the bump stock ban, but even he would recognize that signing this bill would be political suicide. The real danger with bills like this comes if Democrats manage to take control of both chambers of Congress in a future election, or if we end up in a lame duck session after an election where outgoing members of Congress decide to push through gun control legislation on their way out the door. That is when bills like this become genuinely dangerous, because you could have a situation where anti-gun Democrats control the House, control the Senate, and have a president willing to sign gun control into law. The 2026 midterm elections will be critically important for determining whether bills like this remain dead on arrival or whether they start gaining real momentum. But even if this bill somehow became law, the legal challenges would be immediate, and the likelihood of it being struck down in court is extremely high. Under the current Supreme Court precedent from Bruen, this legislation is plainly unconstitutional, and any federal court that applies Bruen honestly would have to issue an injunction blocking enforcement. The case would then be fast-tracked to the Supreme Court, and given the current composition of the court and their recent track record on Second Amendment cases, there's a very strong probability that they would strike down this law entirely. So what do you need to do right now? First, and most importantly, contact your representatives in Congress and tell them that you oppose this bill and any similar legislation that restricts ammunition access or creates government surveillance of ammunition purchases. Call their offices, send emails, send physical letters, and make your voice heard. Politicians need to know that their constituents are paying attention and that voting for gun control will have consequences at the ballot box. Be specific in your communication, reference HR7166 by number, explain why you oppose it, and make it clear that this is an issue you care deeply about. Second, support organizations like Gun Owners of America, the Firearms Policy Coalition, and the Second Amendment Foundation that are already preparing legal challenges to bills like this and fighting these battles in court. These organizations need funding to hire lawyers, file lawsuits, and take cases all the way to the Supreme Court when necessary, and your membership dues and donations directly support that critical work. Third, spread awareness about bills like this among your friends, family, shooting buddies, and local gun community. Most people have no idea that legislation like this is even being proposed, and they certainly do not understand the implications. So educate them and help them understand why this matters. Counter the common sense gun safety narrative with the truth, which is that this bill does nothing to stop crime and everything to burden lawful gun owners. Fourth, support online ammunition retailers while you still can. Buy from them, leave positive reviews, spread the word about good vendors, and help them build the customer base and financial resources they will need to fight back if this legislation ever gains traction. This bill is not law yet. It probably will not become law anytime soon, but the fact that it keeps getting introduced shows that the long-term threat is real. Anti-gun politicians will keep pushing this agenda every chance they get, and if they ever get the political power to pass it, they will do so without hesitation. Your rights are under constant attack, and the only way to protect them is to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay active in fighting back against legislation like this. If you found this breakdown valuable and you want to make sure you stay updated as this situation develops, smash that like button, leave a comment below with your thoughts. Hit subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you do not miss future videos. Share this with everyone you know who cares about gun rights, because this information needs to reach as many people as possible. The mainstream media will never explain this honestly, so it is up to us to get the truth out there.